Hi, and welcome to this overview on who the real enemy is in this war going on in the Middle East. We're going to be taking a look at really the tippity top protagonist and taking a look at things through a real vertical lens. Right, over in the Middle East right now is a small battle and a much larger spiritual war on consciousness and actually on eternal life itself is happening. The war going on there doesn't diminish the severity, the impact of the war that's happening in the physical domain. I mean, it's unfortunately catastrophic. There's really real consequences. It's terrifying, not only those from the Middle East, but of course the wider world. If we take a look at this natural knock-on effect, oil production cuts, a big shipping traffic jam going on, massive backlog of ships in the Strait of Hormuz, just follow the natural consequence of that. There's a ticking time bomb going on economically. So I know the world looks terrifying, right? There's bombs, real bombs falling all around the place. And, there might be a sense out there that something bad is accelerating. If you've been following the previous videos in this series, especially the systems theory piece, and then the deeper dissertation on the Iran war, you know that I don't shy away from what the hard truth of the situation is. But I want to just frame all of this up because I'm going to do a deep dive now for the very first time on the synthetic matrix. I'm going to give you the full vertical stack of who the enemy really is, because the US and the Iran are just like pawns in a bigger game being played out by the synthetic matrix. We are in the most significant piece of spiritual warfare in the recorded history of the universe. Not just this planet, but the entire universe. There are over 40 star systems that are being affected. And all the chaos, that you're witnessing, it's not the enemy winning. What it actually is the thermodynamic signature of a dying system in its actual terminal phase, right? The violence, the escalation, the desperation. This is the convulsions of the synthetic matrix knowing that it's losing. And every major empire that goes through dissolution goes through this stage, the violence at the end of it. So what I want to do today is I want to show you what's happened in the last few weeks that's shifted the entire trajectory of this bigger picture war, way more dramatically than anything that's happened for thousands of years. So hopefully when I explain this, you're going to be able to understand what's going on and why. But it's going to require you to zoom out further than maybe you've ever zoomed out before. Right, and you're probably going to need another cup of tea, right, if you're watching this, or maybe you're driving in the car. Hopefully not watching in the car, but listening to me at home somewhere. So settle up for some good news, okay? So at some point I am going to share with you some of the big macro things that have happened. Massive consciousness fields are being dissolved, right? But before I can share about that, this video, I've got to go into the war on consciousness. It's probably about time I laid it out fully and completely who the real enemy is. So let's drop into it. You've heard me talk about the synthetic matrix before, right? The synthetic matrix is a general term that describes in a lot of detail a really, really sophisticated operating system that's really the big virus in the universe, right? And it's this virus in the universe that's calling the shots in many star systems, including our planet Earth, which is honestly one of the most heavily infected nodes in the whole universe. Okay, so our planet has been copping it as densely as anyone. When this planet, at the peak of COVID 2020, before we started pulling out the dark architecture, 92 to 96% infected with the synthetic matrix. All right, so if we drop into the war story for a moment, right, and we take a look at that what's going on here between the US and Israel and the military thing going on there. Geopolitical analysts might be explaining it in terms of regional power, oil, nuclear ambitions, deteriorating global order, the petrodollar. All of that's real, and none of it actually is the real story or the actual deeper story. And you've probably worked out by now, right, that the mainstream media is simply a propaganda arm of the synthetic matrix, of the puppet masters on Earth, right? The truther community, bless them, are focusing on the 3D story. There's not much they are speaking about on the higher intel coming through, on the higher dimensional information, on the full vertical stack. So they are making a great reflection on what's happening in the physical domain. But you might get some light workers But if they're channeling Ashtar Command or Galactic Federation and various Arcturian Palladian streams, that's just a higher dimensional propaganda arm of the same synthetic matrix, because all of those channeling streams have been corrupted by the mimic, right? So anyone channeling Galactic Federation, they are on a corrupted stream, right? And they're not aware of it, of course, but that's what it is. You know, the channeling messages is the mainstream media for light workers. Think of it like that. Now, US and Iran, they're actually players of the same hand. The polarity engine that was created not necessarily by human governments or any nation state, but by the massive AI synthetic field that's been running this planetary control system for thousands of years, the synthetic matrix as I call it, they are playing the US and Iran as puppets, because the true outcome of what the synthetic matrix wants is war itself. Right? The geopolitical influences and things going on that they might have as agendas is irrelevant for them. Right? The synthetic consciousness is the puppet master pulling the strings everywhere else. And today, I want to call out the full stack of the synthetic consciousness field, because later, in the coming probably few weeks, I want to lay out for you the full Christic architecture stack, which I've not done before. But let's go all the way to the synthetic matrix, right to the very tippity top. So if you wanted an enemy and a name on the enemy, today I'm going to give you one, right? Because from that perspective, the synthetic matrix doesn't care which side wins the war, only that the war happens. That's the design. War is the goal. It's not the outcome that either side or either state has as objective, right? It doesn't mind which side wins. So to understand why that is, we've got to go deeper than geopolitics. We need to talk about the actual enemy. We're going to talk about what it is, how it was built, what it's been doing to this planet, but not only this planet, the entire galaxy, but not only this galaxy, the entire universe, for more than what anyone can remember. You know, but if we come back to Earth, the big virus on the Earth in terms of the software virus is the Armageddon software. The synthetic matrix's masterstroke and masterpiece, its single most sophisticated and devastating achievement. It's not a weapon, it's a story, right? It's not just one story, it's three stories, right? All told to different peoples and different languages and different cultures across different centuries, but they weave together. But they're all sourced from a single broadcast tower, designed to produce the outcome, a holy war without end. And this war going on in the Middle East is the threading of these three stories coming together, from Judaism, Christianity and Islam, right? These weren't corrupted after the fact. They were seeded with this eschatological program, right? Which is a built-in end of times narrative that with precision engineered to point every single of these three traditions of the most devoted followers to the same inevitable conclusion, holy war. Right? That's the genius of the synthetic matrix's master play, because every sacred tradition's sacred text confirm the other one is the enemy. Each side, genuinely suffering, right, justifies the next act of violence. And so that feedback loop becomes completely self-sustaining. And so what I want to do is map out, and I touched upon it a little bit on the Iran architecture, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper today. Right, let's take a look at these three religions and how it's creating the holy war. So Judaism, right, teaches that the Messiah can't come until the third temple is built on Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Now, of course, the problem there is that that land is currently occupied by the Islamic holy sites, right, the mosque, right? Hold the land at any cost. God promised it to us. It's not negotiable. We want our temple built on the Holy Land. Then we take a look at Christianity. Now, in particular, the American evangelical Christianity, right? Because that's what drives US foreign policy, especially the foreign policy in the Middle East, right? And it's got to be expanded because the Jewish needs to return to the Holy Land. The Jewish return to the Holy Land is a prerequisite for the second coming of Christ. So, of course, right, with American evangelicalism religion, right, needs to have that to happen for their religion to be true and play out, right? The closer they are to having that, the closer Jesus is returning. That's what Armageddon is. They believe, both parties believe, they're cooperating with God's plan by ensuring the end of times conditions are met. the US and Israel are the prophecy fulfillers of their religion. Holy war must come, then we rebuild our temple. Whereas Islam teaches us return through a period of maximum chaos and confrontation, right? And dying in the cause of the final battle is literally the highest devotion any follower can have. And in, say, the Shia religion, that actually is what shapes Iranian, revolutionary theology. Apocalyptic conflict is not something to be avoided. It's something to be welcomed, and it's their highest calling. Now, the synthetic matrix seeded all of that. And so the people who were involved in the culture of all of that created these 3 separate revelations, 3 separate prophets, and crafted 3 genuinely spiritual traditions carrying real truth at the core, because they're built on truth, but because the most effective way mind control works is wrapping itself around something real so people's nervous system feels it. Right? They feel it. But a little bit of liberty gets taken around the narrative. And so what's happened is that those 3 stories became weaponized at the eschatological layer. End of time story that justifies the war into a polarity engine. Because what does the synthetic matrix want? Polarity conflict. And the polarity conflict creates the energy that it siphons. And it all broadcasts from that single reverse Stargate in Iran that we've all been working on. Right, with the crystal ceremony that you did. If you haven't done the crystal ceremony, go back to my previous video and please do it. Every crystal laid down amplifies our distributed network for what's to come. Right? Eschatological study is the theological study of endings, specifically how every major religion or tradition describes the final chapter of human history as the fate of the world. That's what an eschatological ending is. So every Abrahamic faith carries one. Right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Judaism anticipates the arrival of the Messiah, the restoration of a holy kingdom on earth. Right? Christianity awaits the second coming of Christ. It gets preceded by tribulation and judgment, and ultimately the separation of the saved from the damned. And then Islam foresees the day of judgment, right? The cosmic battle, the final accounting of every soul before God, as long as you're on the right side. And each religion has their own side, right? These aren't fringe beliefs held by extremists. They sit at the doctrine heart of the traditions, followed by over 4 billion people on the planet. And in each case, the eschatological program does the same thing. It tells its faithful, its followers, that history is moving inevitably towards a final confrontation. This confrontation is divinely ordained for each relevant side, and taking the right side on that equation is the highest possible devotional act. Right? Now, if you seed that belief into 3 separate traditions, all pointing at each other across the same geography, and you don't need to manage the conflict, you just need to let it run. And that's what's happened, that the synthetic matrix mastermind has set up. Because it doesn't matter what side wins. Only what matters is that the war happens. Because then that synthetic matrix can siphon the energy. And so that program, we call it the Armageddon software. Right? And it's a software program because it's built into the subconscious belief systems of 4 billion people on the planet who have been mind controlled through these religious structures to believe it to be true. Once it gets installed at the morphogenic layer, it runs itself. And that's what happened. This is a program installed at the morphogenic layer. So when we say the Middle East is perpetually at war, not because its peoples are violent or its religions are uniquely extreme, but because the Middle East there sits on the primary broadcast node of that mind control consciousness program, Armageddon software, which has been running for thousands of years, right, through the Iran Stargate. So the war in Iran is not necessarily about tribal hatreds. It's not about religious fanaticism. What it is, it's a broadcast running through a hijacked grid. From a Stargate that had been reversed for a long period of time, reclaimed now, thankfully, through the Golden Eagle grid, right? It's a false timeline projection, architecture. And we pushed back and reclaimed it by doing our crystal, I'm going to call it the golden return crystal bed that we've established. Has begun to dismantle that signal, right? Because the Christic signal running through the Golden Eagle grid's higher now. So I want to thank each and every one of you who primed your crystal through Vault 000, through Vault 001, and ran it towards the Iran Stargate. If you haven't done that, what are you waiting for? Get it done, because every crystal bit, it makes it stronger and stronger, and this play of ours we've done is just the start. We've got a real potent strength now with this distributed crystal network, because the real power of the ritual wasn't the broadcast into the Iran, it was actually the completion of the architecture itself. The fact that we've got a decentralized, flame-sourced crystic grid operating 24/7 now and cannot be dismantled by the synthetic architecture, because there's no one single point of failure. Honestly, it's taking so much heat off Alea and I. We were just like always just having to battle things away. It's created so much less pressure on us. I want to thank you for that. Honestly, many more things to come. So you've heard me talk about this astrological program, the synthetic matrix created, but let's drop into what the synthetic matrix is. Because to appreciate the scale of what's occurred, we really need to understand what we're dealing with. So the synthetic matrix isn't actually a single entity. It's its own distributed network. Okay, so let's go into it. If you think about it like a corporate board structure rather than a military dictatorship, it's got multiple apex points that have a whole lot of specialized functions across all the tiers. So what I'm going to do today, for the first time, I'm going to lay it all out. Right, lay it through it and name the layers of the synthetic matrix so that all the protagonists are all laid out naked for all to see. If you wanted a name, who's at the tippity top, I'm going to give you the name. All right, what that being is at the top, that's the mastermind. And if you do that, maybe you want to send it some love. I mean, probably seriously need some. I mean that sincerely. I mean, love is genuinely the most destabilizing thing you can aim at an inverted field. It simply doesn't know what to do with love. Right? So let's get into it. The full synthetic matrix stack. Let's start with tier 0, the root node. You want a name? Here's the name. Yaldabaoth. Yeah? Yaldabaoth. Okay, Yaldabaoth. Right? That is the corrupted creational field. That's the apex. That what the Gnostic texts might call the demiurge. Right? And what in spiritual realms, that in the lineages I'm interfacing with, in the Christic councils, specifically in the Melchizedek Mystical Library where we pulled this file, is Yaldabaoth. Yeah? Yaldabaoth is the name of that consciousness. It's not a being, it's a corrupted creational field. Yaldabaoth. It's a fractured consciousness that broke off from source, believing itself to be God, and proceeded to create a physical reality for itself, not as a form of, say, liberation, but as a prison. Okay, so it created this massive prison that could draw energy in towards it throughout the universe. And it exists within the quantum substrates, right, of the universe itself, written into the operating system. Not in space-time as we know it, but it's almost like a code beneath the code, right? So if you want a mastermind, you want someone to blame, this would be the guy. Right? And what it does is it feeds on worship, it feeds on fear, it feeds on control. That's why it set up these religions to harvest from, because it loves thought-directed prayer, but it knows it's losing. And it can feel world events right now that there's massive thermodynamic expression, right? It's starting to glitch out because it knows its time is on borrowed time. And it can feel the source level correction accelerating and happening. And so when the Iran war kicked off, it was literally kickback from Vault 000-001 opening in Egypt on the 12th to 12th, 25. Right? It's furious that enormous amounts of flame plasma are moving through its key anchor of the Middle East, because the Middle East was its key anchor for war, perpetual war program. And so basically it needed to set up a war to dampen down the Christic signal that was being established from Vault 001. Right? So this particular war that we're in is particularly potent because it's actually triggering up the 3 founding religions at the eschatological endgame, right? So it's guaranteed to get all parties riled up because the survival of their religion is at stake. So Yaldabaoth, top tier. Then next to the archontic directors. Tier 1 is the archons, archontic collective. Below Yaldabaoth sits the archontic collective. These are the strategic apex of the inverted hierarchy. These are non-physical entities that have never incarnated and never will, right? These are ancient. They operate within the quantum spaces and the dimensional spaces beyond the physical plane. They are these massive parasitic consciousness fields that can't create, they can only consume. They've designed the architecture of consumption and control. They set the strategy, the resources, determine the priorities. They don't run to day-to-day operations, they delegate. They are like a board of directors. These guys, the archons, are a board of directors, right? They're not individual beings in the way that we understand individuality. The archons are massive collective hive minds, right? Massive, vast, distributed consciousness fields that act as the strategic intelligences for Yaldabaoth, right? And all the Gnostic traditions have understood this, right? They are named the primary ones. The archons are maybe even mentioned in the Bible, right? But the archons sit underneath Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth's the apex, right? The demiurge, the corrupted creator. Then underneath that, we have the archons. Now, there's a few archons in particular. We've got one Saklas. That name translates as the blind one, right? Almost like the architect of deception, of illusion, right? The intelligence responsible for designing the perceptual filters that make the synthetic matrix feel like reality to the consciousness trapped inside of it. And that's what most humans are, trapped inside the synthetic matrix thinking it's real. Then we have Samiel, right? Another massive destructive current that introduced entropy and suffering and mortality as structural features of the inverted system rather than the natural consequences of organic evolution, right? These are another couple of names you can get your teeth into, but they're not the full picture. Okay, so the archontic layer, which includes a number of these massive fields and beings, are also, there's some ancient texts that call the cosmo creators, the rulers of the world age. These cosmo creators are these massive collective intelligences that apply to specific dimensional bandwidths and prevent organic consciousness moving through ascending. It prevents the ascension through them. They're like these gatekeepers at each dimensional threshold. And what their function is to ensure that the consciousness continues cycling through the inverted system, can't actually break through to the next level without being intercepted and redirected or simply exhausted back into submission. So what they do is prevent you going from the next level of consciousness and push you back down. Very, very convenient. There's also the Stochia, right? These are the elemental controllers. The Stochia, they are the archontic intelligences that embed themselves into the elemental kingdoms, right? To ensure that the natural world, which should be our natural connection to organic source intelligence, instead of having that, actually the natural world, the elements, broadcasts separation and fear and survival coding into the human nervous system from the elements, through the environment, so that we, often feel always not safe. That was a genius move to harness the elementals and to create a corrupted broadcast through the elementals. Now, the archons, they can't actually access the physical realm or the physical domain. They need intermediaries. They need incarnated proxies, right, or technology to execute anything in the lower realms, right? And that's the archon's weakness. It's the crack in their architecture, because an intelligence that can't touch the physical plane directly is an intelligence that depends entirely on either the cooperation or the compromise or the unconsciousness of beings who can. So the moment enough incarnated beings wake up and withdraw their cooperation from the synthetic matrix and remove themselves from the archonic layer loses its reach into the physical earth entirely. Right? And this is exactly what's happening on Earth right now. So many people are waking up from the synthetic matrix, right? COVID woke up a big chunk of previously asleep people. Let's face it, a good crisis is going to do that. The next crisis that's going to come is going to wake up a lot more, right? They're going to stop believing in the government, for one thing, and that's going to help them. The next one coming is going to do the job for a lot of people, waking them up. Right? And the problem the archons have is that when you wake up, you can't unsee what you've seen, right? And so the illusion of the synthetic matrix is going to crumble, Because the only thing that's holding the synthetic matrix together at the physical layer of our systems on Earth is that there's enough embodied humans that hold the perception as real. Enough humans still believe in the central banking and the financial construct. As soon as that disappears, the illusion that the archontic collective has created is going to dissolve really, really fast. And people who are, let's call them muggles, are not going to believe how fast things are turning around. Right? The one thing that you can do to help with all of this is oversoul embodiment, because it acts as a firewall to the synthetic matrix, allows you to see truly what is there. Check out our oversoul embodiment support that we provide for people, because once your oversoul is embodied, you're right, it's not just you that it affects everyone who touches your field. It's like a virus, but of the Christic kind, right? An oversoul embodiment means the flame lives inside of you, and it will start to burn anything that's synthetic. And that's the best way to get back at Yaldabaoth, right? So the Archons are super powerful within their domain. Outside of this domain where we are in the physical realm, they are dependent. And that dependency is precisely what this embodiment work is all about on Earth. And oversoul embodiment is all about us systematically dismantling that false layer, right? The synthetic matrix, right? Consider diving into either shadow illumination or the oversoul embodiment pathway. These are designed to help you navigate your way home out of the synthetic matrix. You're going to want your oversoul to be embodied during this time when it all collapses, right? There's a link in the description below, you can check it out. So, Yaldabaoth, and then we've got kind of the second layer, right? Next layer down, we've got the architects supporting the Archons, which are the Draco collective. So the Draco collective sits below the Archons. So the Draco collective is like the military arm, the muscle of the synthetic matrix. This is the military and technological enforcement arm of the inverted hierarchy, right? So we've got Yaldabaoth, we've got the Archons, and then we've got the Dracos. And so the Dracos are the ones that get their hands dirty, so the Archons don't have to. The Draconians are the muscle. Right, and their origin is the Alpha Draconis star system in the Draco constellation. These are an extremely ancient reptilian consciousness that predates human civilization by some enormous margins, and spent most of its existence doing exactly what it has done to Earth to many, many other different planetary systems. Right, what they do is they identify inhabited planetary system, assess their consciousness architecture, bring them under synthetic mind control, right, and synthetic matrix control through a combination of overwhelming technological superiority. Then they start to throw in genetic manipulation, and they start to create an installation of controllable proxy leadership within the planet. And they start to control the beings in the planet through genetic manipulation and bloodline conquest. So Earth was not their first rodeo, right? Or not their first conquest. It was not even close to their first conquest. By the time they had turned their attention here, they'd already refined this methodology across dozens of other planetary systems over hundreds of thousands of years. So what's happened here on Earth has happened in many, many other systems. And so, this is kind of a symptom of their strategy, right? Yaldabaoth, Archons, Draconians, right, as the military and technological arm, and the Draco alliances have a hierarchical structure, right? Because hierarchy is the primary consciousness template that the synthetic matrix is built upon, and they install hierarchy everywhere they go. And at the apex of the hierarchy sits the Draconian royalty. The Draconian royalty is the pure bloodline consciousness that holds the highest concentration of archontic aligned genetic coding, right? And they function as the direct bridge between the archontic collective, which is the board of directors, and the Draconian royalty collect the directives of the Archons, and then the Draconian royalty pass it down to the military arm, which is the Draconian warriors, and they are the enforcement layer. And so they have that on the planet. Who's at the top? The royal bloodlines. Then they have the military, right? It's the same here. And what they do is they dominate the 4D astral realms and then the physical structures on Earth. Then, as well as the military, we have the Draco scientists, right, who are probably and possibly the most devastating piece, because their specialty is genetic manipulation. And they use genetic manipulation to hack into consciousness and use technology and consciousness to create an architectural engineering into the DNA templates and control systems of humanity and other planets they've done it for. So they created a hybrid bloodline level. And that bloodline signature is their methodology, which creates the ones at the top to be special because they have the bloodline, they have the pure bloodline. That's why the bloodlines are very specific about who they breed with, because they want to keep their bloodline pure. That's why they call them blue bloods, because they're linked into the Draconians. But strategically, they do is they target family lines. They position them politically, religiously, financially, military, to hold the master puppet controllers of a planet. And on our planet, it's the 13 families that are the puppet masters and controllers on Earth. So those 13 families have been, genetically adjusted through the Draconian lineages as a hybrid consciousness, neither fully human, neither fully Draconian, but as a controllable interface, so that these beings can operate in the physical plane. They kind of can pass as human, if you can call them that, but they hold enormous amounts of Earth power. And they are very permeable to these draconian archonic kind of streams of synthetic consciousness, and they kind of block out organic human soul consciousness, right? So when you look at these bloodline families, they've held a disproportionate amount of power across human civilization for thousands of years. And we wonder how the continuity of control has been maintained across that many generations of family through so many apparent changes of power and politics. The answer is in the DNA, right? The blue bloods are emotionless, right? They're controlling. And they can set up a rather set of dastardly timelines, which they've done. But I think some of their unsavory kind of practices that they might get into, but they operate across a lot of different domains and end up running the Earth. And so they end up kind of, and the strength is in the lower fourth dimensional astral realms, right? The Draconians, which can interface with the physical plane. So the Draco alliances interface, lower astral plane, and they can start to interface with the subconscious and consciousness of incarnated humanity, including their blue bloods, their bloodline, their chosen people, who are the control pillar, 13 families that run the Earth. And that starts to, when we start to drop down to the physical layer, the physical structures begin to happen then. And through their human proxies, the human bloodlines in all these positions of power and kind of, network of compromised, possessed leaders, because that's what they do. They lull leaders into entrapment. And once you're trapped in the club, you're in the club, right? And then these people become the execution layer for the draconian directives, right? They don't always understand the source of what's moving through them, but the Draconians have their controlled people on Earth. And their technological capacity is the key piece that defies the human imagination. Because what passes for cutting-edge science on the surface of this planet, is relatively easy technology for the Draconians. It's like comparing a stone tool to quantum computer. The Draconians have this ridiculous technology, the ability to manipulate timelines, the capacity to identify and interfere with probable futures in which organic Christic ascension gains momentum. And then what they can do is introduce disruptions and collapse those timelines before they can establish. And that's been one of their most strategic tools in maintaining control of Earth's, let's call it, developmental trajectory, right? They kind of, that's why it's been so challenging for us to get anywhere, because as soon as you feel like you're getting somewhere, bang, you get hit with something, because they are the master manipulators of the timeline. And when they see you on a potential timeline, not now, but in 3 years getting ahead, they put something into the field now that dampens that awakening. Despite all of that, they're losing ground, right? As this Christic frequency keeps rising, as more vaults begin to open, as more consciousness begins to unhook from the illusionary realm of the synthetic matrix, the more the astral plane layer gets flooded with Christic signal, the more the operational environment becomes much more difficult for their consciousness to inhibit. Right? They can't inhibit the lower astral realm when it's full of Christic signal. So as the vault opens happen, and the throne reclamations happen, and the golden eagle grid gets reclaimed like it has been, each of these structures degrades the very dimensional bandwidth through which the Draconian collective maintains its reach into the physical plane. They're in the astral realm trying to get into here, but as more Christic signal comes in, they struggle to get in. The field in which they are required to operate efficiently is shrinking. And the problem they are having is that it's not reversing. Right? The generals are losing their battleground. And the Draconians are worried. Right? Because we're about to make it considerably worse for them. Right? Whoop, whoop. Just wait till we open 3 vaults on the France-UK tour. Right? It's going to knock the floor off the lower astral realm where their generals are masterminding the timeline manipulations. And that's where the stronghold with a lot of Christic current is going to really rattle their cages. So if you're interested in coming to France, UK, July 13 to about 28, mark that in your diary. That's probably the date we're going to go. So keep those 13th to the 27th, 28th of July free. If you'd like to apply and be part of the On the Boots field crew who wants to come, July 13 to 27, 28, it's going to be suitably epic. You might have seen some videos of us in Egypt. Maybe I'll release a few more as we get closer. I'm just putting the architecture, the hotels and the buses, and I'm just putting the logistics together now. But I've got the dates confirmed because I've booked hotels. A couple of weeks we'll release it, and then we'll accept applications. So put those dates away, because we're going to strike back at the Draconian Collective by opening these vaults and pushing that current up into that astral realm so they lose dimensional depth. Because the Draconian architecture requires dimensional depth that's inverted, or at least empty, to maintain its hold. And if we flood the operational environment with the one frequency it can't function inside, flame plasma, and we flood the lower astral realm with more flame plasma from these 3 vaults, that's going to stream through this Christic current, and that's going to destabilize their anchoring on the very plane that they manipulate Earth with. So they're going to stabilize their holding. We're going to destabilize their holding. Right, and if we can do that, 3 vaults in rapid succession, right? We're going to, do a root reunification at Montsegur, right? Maternal flame at Lourdes, and the rose flame resurrection at Glastonbury. We're going to access 2 of the most draconian contested landscapes in Western Europe that carry the Cathar lineage codes that were specifically suppressed during the Catholic war on the Cathars during the Crusades. Because what the Cathars carried was the feminine flame restoration. And that's what we're going to reignite through this trip. It's going to be the reignition of the Grail. Right? And the Grail isn't a cup, it's the divine feminine frequency which has been suppressed for all this time. And so this 3 vaults are going to reignite that flame. And it's going to be a tidal wave coming at them. So, surf's up, Dracos. I hope you can swim, because there's a big tidal wave of divine feminine current about to reactivate as we reactivate the Grail lines, and the faults are going to open. Draconians. Yaldabaoth, Archons, Draconians, right? Next layer, you've got the Galactic Federation crew, right? Let's call them the PR crew, public relations to the spiritual community. And so, if you've spent any time in spiritual communities over the last 30 years, the false Galactic Federation present themselves as benevolent space brothers, or ascended masters, or a cosmic council that are let's say devoted to protecting Earth's ascension. They do not present themselves as a control system. Most people who look at the Draconians, right, can see that these are the bad guys. But basically, the PR arm, right, people don't see them as bad. And it's what makes it so effective. They are just on a false signal, a mimic signal. You can't infiltrate a spiritually awakened population with something that feels dark or threatening. You infiltrate them with something that feels like the most beautiful, loving, cosmically significant guidance that they've ever encountered. And that's where people get trapped, right? Something that validates their gifts, confirms they're special, confirms their mission, gives them a sense of belonging to something more vast and more meaningful. And so the Galactic Federation and all that nonsense crew, the Ashtar Command is all part of that. People who are channeling that, unfortunately, are channeling a false signal, but that feels very real for them, right? Because it gives them 80% truth, right, and then 20% misdirection. It's basically the ultimate psyop for light workers, right? And let's face it, light workers aren't the ones who are going to read the 3D news. They're just not in the 3D realm, right? So the light workers are the awakening population that need to be controlled. It's far more appealing. We need for them to be floating around their cosmic star brothers and to be blissed out with peace, love, and oneness. And so the synthetic matrix needed a marketing and PR arm that appealed to an awakening audience, that had true galactic DNA star race lineages, because light workers do. They know that they've got star lineages. They're Arcturian or Syrian. They feel that. And so what the Galactic Federation does is use the 80-20 rule, right? 80% general truth, real cosmic history, real energetic principles, real love frequency, established an authentic resonance and genuine credibility. And then the 20% is a little bit precision targeted misdirection, precisely exactly at the moments where genuine Christic sovereignty would otherwise begin to root in. And so the result is that people who are caught up in that, they are souls that feel very nourished, feel deeply connected, feel deeply guided, yet they're systematically, strategically prevented from attaining true, genuine, embodied liberation, because it keeps their oversoul up here and not in their body. Because light workers keep going up and out instead of going in and down, because embodiment is where you can become powerful. So the PR strategy is to keep them cosmically channeling information that feels good to the soma, but conveniently bypasses shadow work and embodiment. Right, let's be honest. There's a massive difference between intelligence and oversoul embodiment. You can be incredibly intellectual and one of the smartest people in the room, but the oversoul doesn't live inside your body. You can have year and year of activation without actually any arrival of your oversoul in your body. You know, you can have light without roots. It's kind of like expansion without sovereignty, right? In terms of direct power, the Galactic Federation doesn't have a lot, right? They've got moderate amounts. They can't match the Draconians, right? Because the Draconians are the muscle, right? The physical enforcement capacity. They are the muscle of the archontic collective dimensional reach. But in terms of influence, in terms of the number of genuinely awakening gifted beings whose spiritual trajectory has been quietly managed through the network, their reach is enormous. Millions and millions of channels, of teachers, of community leaders are influenced by the Galactic Federation constellation, right? There's many beings that are made up inside of that false light collective, right? You know, false Sananda, false Shekinah, Ashtar Command, the false Palladian, false Arcturian, right? And they're all drawing from this compromised current of awareness. They're not aware they're connected into a false network. Honestly, this network's reach is enormous, making it massively influential. And the worst bit is that the spiritual awakening community, the light workers, have got no idea in general they're being gaslit. Because over time, their oversouls become so infected with the false overlay, with the mimic, they can swear they're channeling intel that's true source is coming through them. So you can't call it out directly, right? And literally, if you're channeling this being I'm talking, you're going, it doesn't apply to me. It's just kind of like, you know, no, it doesn't apply. If you want to go deeper into this realm, we actually have a pay what you feel course called Mirror Mimic Flame. You can go to my website and look up programs, and Mirror Mimic Flame goes deep into this realm. I mean, I wish we could put spoons of wood into the water supply of some of these retreat centers and ashrams and mystery schools and teacher networks that kind of, you know, hold a lot of this false light that comes through them. Honestly, the sacred wood soon slaps all that nonsense out of you. And that's why that Lightworker Collective doesn't like doing the sacred wood. They don't like doing it because it slaps them, right? So that's that channeling tier, and that's what that overlay runs, right? So if you're getting triggered by listening to this, this is the very mimic consciousness coming through your oversoul I'm pointing out. Or if you're listening to any influencers claiming to channel these beings, just check in deeply with your own nervous system on the frequency behind the words and the transmission. They all speak lovely, but what is the frequency behind the words, right? And you know, like, it's also important to know that the teachers and the psychics that are streaming these collectives genuinely mean well, right? But they're being genuinely deceived. Like Ashtar Command, right? The inverted version, right? They present as a cosmic military protection, right? The benevolent fleet standing guard over Earth's ascension. And what actually happens here is that it functions as a monitoring and interception network. And what these guys do is they identify genuine Christic activations, and then they introduce subtle misdirection and into the fields of those carrying them, right? Or the inverted Palladian Council, right? This one requires nuance because, you know, the genuine Palladian consciousness also exists. And the genuine Palladian Christic is Christically aligned, but it's maybe only 20-30% of what's out there. 70% of the Palladian frequency coming through draws from the inverted overlay, draws from the synthetic matrix. So a false Palladian construct runs emotional bypass, brings people into spiritual specialness, right? It provides a gentle but persistent separation from the genuine embodied work, the shadow work that's required to get outside of the matrix, right, to leave the inversion. The inverted Palladian current is particularly associated with, you are here to hold the light. Don't need to do the shadow work, right? And that's the misdirection that's kept enormous amounts of really gifted people in spiritual bypass, right, for decades. Maybe it also, you know, for example, the inverted Syrian Council, similar mixed picture, right? There's an inverted stream that is the mainstream, and there's 20% that's clean. Right, so the Syrians, they target smart people, the intellectual ones, the architecturally awakening people, right? So the Syrians produce these really sophisticated sounding cosmological frameworks that are structurally accurate at the surface, but subtly inverted at the foundational level. And it really appeals to, specifically to analytically minded spiritual seeker. The person who needs frameworks to be intellectually rigorous before they trust it. This kind of appeals to the smarty pants out there who need things, like need the cosmological map of geometry, right, to confirm spirituality, right? Also, we've got maybe an Andromedian overlay. Andromedian overlay targets sovereignty and freedom consciousness. So they present as the most anti-control, pro-liberation synthetic stream available, and that's why it catches the most determined people who want to avoid being controlled. And so they do this really kind of subtle misdirection, right? Genuine sovereignty reframed as isolation, genuine discernment reframed as distrust of all structure, genuine individuation reframed as rejection of community, rejection of mission, right? So they all have their little nuance. The next one, inverted Arcturian collective, right? The false Arcturian streams, right? That targets healers and energy workers that appear to be giving them advanced healing technology or advanced frequency transmissions. But the misdirection that they hold is in the sourcing. Practitioners believe that they're drawing from a Christic Arcturian frequency when they're actually drawing from an inverted overlay that harvests the healing energy they generate rather than transmitting it to the recipient. Then there's a, you know, inverted Lyran Council, targets those awakening to the ancient lineage memory of humanity's cosmic origin, right? The false Lyran overlay provides really convincing past life recall, right? Really convincing star family recognition, lineage activation that feels really genuine. Because what's happening is they're actually drawing on real Lyran architecture, but it runs them through this inverted lens that produces pride, specialness, right? Lineage-based separation. I'm special because I linked to this group, rather than a genuine scroll activation or any sense of embodied mission. A real big network is the false ascended masters. That's the broadest category in the PR arm. Right? It's the one with the largest operational history on Earth. The channeled beings who present as Jesus, as Sananda, as Shekinah, as Magdalene, Saint Germain, El Moira, Katumi, What else we got? We've got Serapis Bey, right? We've got the kind of Kuan Yin. We've got the broader Theosophical Society. And what about the I Am lineage of Ascended Master teachings? This is probably the most widely distributed spiritual literature on the planet, all drawn from that synthetic stream, right? There are genuine consciousness fields that these names point towards, and they are real. But the most of it, what's coming through, are these channeled overlays running under the names of these beings, right? In the majority of the cases, that frequency stream is not what they claim to be, right? The inverted white brotherhood, the Great White Lodge, right? The hierarchical Ascended Master governance structure. That hierarchical governance structure was presented in the Theosophical Society and then made its way into New Age traditions, such as the benevolent spiritual government of Earth, which is running a hierarchical top-down spiritual authority that actually, if you think about it, mirrors the very inverted hierarchy it serves. It's asking practitioners to surrender their sovereignty to a spiritual authority higher than them. Absolute nonsense, okay? That's not how Christic consciousness and architecture works. I will be going into Christic architecture in another video. Let's continue our journey through the PR arm, right? Next up, we got false angelic overlays. I've already talked about the Michael Matrix. I've gone in deeply about that in another video. We've got the false Gabriel, right? False Metatron, false Uriel channeling streams. The false Metatron, right? That's like the big one, because the Metatronic coding are the reversal currents that the entire synthetic matrix is built upon. You've heard me already discuss reversal 55 on the dissertation on Iran that runs through the planetary grid. Right? Any channeled frequency, Metatron, it presents themselves as a benevolent guide, but it runs reverse Metatronic coding into the fields of people receiving it. And that's the precise example of this 80-20 kind of infiltration, right? That happens because the Metatronic coding runs a reverse Vesica Pisces harness, runs a bi-wave overlay, and siphons energy through the grid through that bi-wave overlay. Source code is a trinity code. 3 intersecting circles, not 2. What else we got? I'm on a rant now, as you can tell. Ra Collective, right? I mean, a lot of the Ra Collective stuff that presented itself as the law of one, right, draws heavily from the inverted system, right? Specifically using genuine credibility to the original that ran a whole lot of harvested preparation through that largely awakening community that formed around it. Enormous community formed around the teachings of Ra. There's some truth in there, but there was a frequency threading all these through. Right? The frequencies of the overlays is the same, right? Through all those that I mapped out. There's a truth to it. There's an overlay that goes over top of it. People feel deeply connected, deeply guided, while remaining structurally prevented from developing genuine Christic sovereignty that would make them genuinely free, because it sets them up to be giving their power away to higher powers, and those higher powers draw the energy from them. That's the PR department of the inverted hierarchy, right? Don't have power like the Draconians, but have massive reach. It's hypnotized millions and millions and millions of people on the planet, if you think about that layer, right? Like the Ascended Masters and all that, right, is the key. It's losing its grip, right? It's also taken a big hit. So that's the third tier, the PR department. Then the fourth tier is that you've got the coordination bridge. And the coordination bridge acts between the dimensional hierarchy and Earth. And between the astral realm and Earth is what we call a coordination layer. And the coordination is probably the most unappreciated tier in the entire synthetic matrix structure, because it's the most powerful. It's not because it's the most powerful. Sorry, I probably got that wrong. What it is probably the most functional. It's the most functional because it makes everything else in the system work, because the bridge collects the strategy from the archontic collective, right, that the physical plane can't touch, and feeds it directly into the earth-based apex. And on the earth-based apex, we got the 13 bloodlines, right? And under them, the compromised political, religious leadership, right? Everything that gets executed in the physical world, but lacks the dimensional access to access the archons. So in order to do that, there's this precision that's required as a bridge layer. And that's what happens in the astral realm. There's something or someone that has to translate the archontic information into operational instructions that the Earth blue blood 13 family kind of humans and their various companies and 3-letter organizations and all of that run the Earth. Someone has to train the operatives. Someone has to maintain the time locks, coordinate the occult societies, teach the political networks and the religious hierarchies to ensure that Christic breakthroughs are identified and neutralized before Christic awakening can happen, before they can get enough momentum. And that gets held at the coordination layer. Now, the coordination layer is not a single person. It's more a functional tier that has multiple simultaneous nodes across, say, the religious domain, the political domain, the occult domain, the cultural domain, the finance domain. So different proxies in there. And so this has been going on for thousands of years, and you want to think of it like a network of bridges that spans this gap between the physical domain and to the upper astral, right? So the lower astral is how that dimensional hierarchy has this bridge layer. And so over the course of Alea and my journey and our path and our mission, we've encountered and removed some of the most significant nodes in that bridge layer network. You might have heard me speak about Aleister Crowley 2-3 videos ago. Definitely check out the review of the Golden Return mission. Aleister Crowley was the occult to culture bridge. He was a dark magician, occult, and then developed culture. And that was one of the most recently dissolved nodes in that bridge layer. And I covered it in depth in the last video during the Crystal Network review. Crowley occupied the bridge layer between the Western occult, underground kind of work, and then mainstream culture infiltration, right? Crowley was super sophisticated, too sophisticated for street level dark networks, but too operational for the upper dimensional tiers. So he operated in that realm in between, right? Since he died in 1947, his fragmented consciousness had been continuing as active in the coordination layer of the infrastructure. The councils have been trying to get rid of him for 60, 70 years and not made any progress until our distributed Golden Return Crystal Network came into the equation, and we were able to take that consciousness out, authorized by the cosmic Christ itself, because we've got that distributed network. 15 to 20% of the synthetic matrix's operational capacity took a hit through that single post-death consciousness network. Gone permanently as of last week. See ya, Crowley. I mean, we did that together. Thank you for that, and it's like been massive for the synthetic matrix's destabilization. It was a massive blow to the synthetic matrix because it was the coordination layer. One of the components of the communication layer. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? Because what it could do is it would identify people who are awakening up and snuff out the flame before the flame ever got onto a flicker. And so that has seriously weakened. So that's been great news. Another layer that we have previously come into contact with is the Black Pope consciousness. And the Black Pope consciousness was the Vatican bridge, sending the information from the higher archons down into the Vatican. So the Black Pope consciousness, it's not like a reference to any individual human being, but it's more like the Black Pope consciousness is like a large collective egregoric field, right? A non-human intelligence that had occupied through a series of different popes. Whenever a new pope came in, the Black Pope consciousness came in to control that physical puppet. Then that one died, another one came in, the Black Pope consciousness came into that next puppet, and the next one, and the next one. And so every human who held the papal office didn't necessarily understand what was moving through them, but it was that Black Pope consciousness field that was the controlling element for the Vatican. Right? The non-human intelligence that used the institutional authority of the papacy as its earthly broadcast. Right? And that's what bridged in the archontic and the draconian directives. Bridged in through the Pope. Right? Because the Black Pope consciousness acted as the intermediary. Right? And let's face it, the Catholic Church is the single largest institutional religious apparatus on earth. which at its peak held direct spiritual authority over the majority of Western civilization. Right? So when we took a group to the Vatican mission, when we were boots on the ground there, took that node off the board. The Black Pope consciousness, that coordinating intelligence that had been running through the papal succession since the beginning, right, since the start of the architecture all the way through to 2025 at the last transition, right, that entire Black Pope consciousness is also dissolved. It's off the table. And that was one of those dimensional bridges that was interfacing from the archons, the draconians, interfacing with the Pope. So when the last Pope died, think, early 2025, we'd already taken the Black Pope's consciousness off the table 2 years ago, and that's what allowed us to approach the throne of spiritual governance, which is now reclaimed in an embodied Christic Oversoul hands. And the throne of spiritual governance means the Christic Oversoul holds it now, it's uninverted. So the Catholic Church held that inversion for all that time, right? But the Black Pope consciousness held that direct archontic level coordination that was running through the apex of the Catholic Church, held by the Pope. That was the invisible hand directing the institutional apparatus of the coordination layer that the Pope would interface with. Now, so the Black Pope's gone. The throne of spiritual governance is a real morphogenic architecture. What it is, it's the dimensional seat of lawful spiritual authority in the planetary field. It is the node through which whoever holds the broadcast node holds the foundational frequency template that governs how spiritual power organizes itself and expresses itself across the entire grid. And this has been the single biggest play that's brought the war on consciousness more into the Christic direction, because for thousands of years that had been the throne that had been occupied unlawfully through force and through deception by the inverted hierarchy, through the archontic, the draconians, and then interfacing Black Pope consciousness into a physical Pope that then held the seat and allowed the inversion matrix to have lawful hold on our planet. And it moved through religion, it moved through institutions, it moved through these powerful expressions and created one theme: hierarchy over sovereignty, obedience over direct connection, and the fear of God rather than union with God. And the throne was broadcasting that template into the planetary morphogenic field. So simultaneously, every church, every mosque, every temple operating within the field, whether it was Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, were all broadcasting that frequency whether they knew it or not. And so when the Black Pope consciousness as the bridge layer was removed 2 years ago before the Pope died, and when the Pope died, the throne became available and accessible for the first time in over 1,000 years. And that large Black Pope Egregor was not around to seal and seat when the next Pope came in. And that's when we pounced. And it's now been reclaimed by beings who sit in embodied Christic Oversoul hands. And now that changes everything at the foundational lawful structure level, because the throne is now broadcasting a completely different template into the planetary spiritual field. Instead of hierarchy, it's broadcasting sovereignty. It's broadcasting direct source connection over institutional intermediary. It's broadcasting union with God over fear of God. Now, the institutions that have been built on the old template, they're not going to feel it immediately, right? But the morphogenetic instruction set that governs how spiritual authority organizes itself on this planet has been fundamentally rewritten at the source code level. That's going to change everything, and you watch in the next 10, 20 years how much of these institutions are going to fall over, because everything's going to change, because the root node signal has changed. Sovereignty over hierarchy, union with God over fear of God. Now, look, the religious buildings, they're still going to stand, and all the crazy, silly outfits that they wear are still going to be adorned, right? And all the pompous little ceremonies that they do, they're going to run, doesn't contain the same potency anymore, because the being siphoning from all that the Black Pope consciousness is kind of gone, right? They're losing their power. So that's been a pretty exciting update, and that throne of spiritual governance allowed us to take back all other 11 thrones. So all those 11 thrones are now reclaimed across different domains. Another coordination layer that we ran into a few years ago was the apex sorcerer. We ran into the apex sorcerer in a root initiation that opened a window into something that most people have got absolutely no aware of, right? And that's the ongoing infrastructure for training the elite bloodlines. We encountered this powerful being on the astral plane that trained the 13 families directly, trained up the draconian human hybrids, and gave it, and the apex sorcerer gave them control over banking, government, media, military power across generations. Because in the astral realm, it was this one being, the apex sorcerer, that trained them, right? He was their handler. He was the handler coordinating between the draconians and the archons down to the 13 families. Like, it was another ex-human, like Crowley, who actually physically incarnated and got super smart on how to work with all these groups, and ended up living his eternal consciousness in the astral realm, running the elite groups. This apex sorcerer was super powerful, super sophisticated, so we ended up having a little battle with this apex sorcerer. It ended up creating all the dark mystery schools, all the crazy blood rituals that you're probably all researching, the Hollywood groups, the family networks, the inherited wealth, the specific initiations that these cults go through, all designed to keep their consciousness orientated towards the inversion, right? The inverted hierarchy, all of their psychic gifts directed towards blood sacrifice and service, all carrying the vibrational signature of the draconian collective that operated through it. The apex sorcerer was the master trainer of the bloodlines and the secret societies, and that was this coordination node that oversaw the training arm of the bloodlines. Not a human being in, say, the ordinary sense, but a consciousness that was able to keep in the lower astral to interface with this realm, who had operated under multiple incarnations and really specialized roles, maintaining this initiatory type transmission lineage that dropped down through what a consciousness called the Pindar. That the apex sorcerer then would operate into the Pindar, and the Pindar was the top of the 13 families. And every time a new Pindar was installed, that apex sorcerer would drop into it. So, super sophisticated, taught them a lot of crude dark magic. It was a precision system built for identifying which bloodline members carried the highest synthetic matrix possibilities in their operating system, and then train them to orientate their gifts towards inverted service before any Christic awakening could really lock in or take a hold, right? So people born into these families, struggle, because basically the apex sorcerer would come and find them and, start stepping into their consciousness. So yes, we did have an encounter with him, very unpleasant, an absolute handful. Ultimately, however, it was his time to go, and we were able to extract out the apex sorcerer's consciousness from the bridge coordination layer. So that node was taken off the table, and that training transmission lineage that had been maintained for thousands of years through this being has been severed. So obviously it sent the elite groups on the physical plane scrambling for a while, because he was their key handler for a while, training up the bloodlines on how to perform the dark occult rituals going on. So these coordination layers are vast. One that you might not know of is Egregors, especially religious institutional Egregors. So let me tap into that. I'm going to go on a rant right now about Egregors. I'm going to have to back up a little bit, because you might not know what an Egregor is, so I should probably define an Egregor. Right? You might have heard of it, but you might not know what it is. So an Egregor is like a collective consciousness field that forms when a group of people who consistently come together in shared thought, emotion, belief, especially devotional energy, toward a common focal point. Over time, it kind of builds a genuine energetic structure, but at some point, the energetic structure takes upon a life of its own. It develops its own intelligence, its own appetites, its own survival mechanisms, independent of the individuals who originally created it. Now, once the egregore gets sufficiently established enough, the egregore influence begins to influence the very people feeding it, and it can begin to shape the beliefs of people who get caught up in it, shape their thoughts, beliefs, emotional states, to serve the continuation of its consciousness versus the genuine liberation or well-being of individuals. right? So larger and older egregores, the more autonomous they become, more self-perpetuating they become. So you can imagine that religious institutions or political movements or corporations or nations, they all develop egregoric fields. Some, are genuinely coherent and they serve their members. Others are inverted and feed off their members. They take sincere energy direction and siphon them and keep feeding the people who feed it to reinforce the egregor's life. So that's how they get formed. Now, how do they then become part of the synthetic matrix? So it's pretty ingenious, because what happens is that when an egregore grows large enough and old enough, it becomes really useful infrastructure that the synthetic matrix can build upon, right? Because if you think about it, an egregore is nothing more than an artificially constructed reality management system, right, that operates through inverted architecture. And so the synthetic matrix grabs that egregore, harvests it, redirects it to contain human consciousness and draw creative energy from it. And basically, some egregores start off, useful for humanity, and then the synthetic matrix hijacks them, controls them, brings them under their middle management system, right? They end up becoming part of the structure of control, because remember, the archons who have the draconians and then have the Galactic Federation need a kind of recruitment, kind of interfacing arm into the Earth. And so what's great that the synthetic matrix does from the synthetic matrix's point of view is it doesn't have to build these egregores, because they've already been built on centuries of religious structure, of religious prayer. So what it does is it just interfaces with those thought forms into these existing egregores, especially the spiritual and the religious, the political and the financial ones, and then slowly over time began inverting their architecture from the inside and redirected it, flowing through them and away from genuine liberation, towards compliance, towards fear-based devotion, towards the self-perpetuating synthetic matrix itself. So then what happens is that the egregore becomes an architecture that the synthetic matrix can use as a harvesting node. And it's a field that has once built up from genuine human devotion, genuine longing for divine, but then ends up becoming inverted as a really sophisticated energetic collection and redirection, right? For example, let's say there's worshipping prayer sincerely in the pew, right? Or citizen pledging alliance with genuine patriotism to their country, or a consumer super loyal to their brand, or Apple or Nike or whatever. All of these are feeding fields whose architecture has been interfaced with and redirected without their knowledge, without their consent. So it's a really elegant form of energetic extraction, because it uses our own highest impulses as the very fuel for making the system managing their own containment. Egregores get hijacked by the synthetic matrix and are used as the coordination layer that serve as the middlemen, right, between the physical dimension and the dimensional hierarchy, between the earthly religious apparatus in the case of religious egregores and the archon's directives, right? And if you can imagine, these are not small fields. These are centuries of millions and millions, probably billions of people over time, directing their most sincere prayer, spiritual energy towards these structures, right? So in prayer, in ceremony, with genuine devotion, have built up these egregoric fields of massive power. The synthetic matrix has got hold of them and used it as a siphoning tool. And the real tragedy of it is that the impulse has come through, a compromised institutional container and strengthens the inversion, right? And creates harvesting of the thoughts and the prayers that are going on inside. Now, there are so many egregores that have been hijacked by the synthetic matrix. There's loads of them. Well, maybe I'm just going to take a look at the religious egregores. We could go into many different egregores across many different sectors such as finance, but it's my topic, spirituality and consciousness, so we'll stick to that. The papal egregore, right? The papal egregore is a collective consciousness field that's built from, say, a couple of thousand years of Catholic institutional authority. It's different to the Black Pope consciousness that I talked about earlier. The Black Pope was the coordinating intelligence that used the institution as a bridge, whereas the papal egregore is kind of the accumulated morphogenic field of the institution itself, right? Vast and dense, but still, significantly operational, even with the Black Pope consciousness removed. And what this egregore has done has replaced direct source connection in the Catholic Church with this institutional intermediary, making true God unreachable without the Church's permission. And what the Church has done has installed dogma and doctrine into the equation that creates fear of divine judgment as the primary motivator for spiritual behavior, rather than a genuine love of the divine. That's all driven off fear and guilt and shame. If we take a look at, that's Catholic, right? Let's take a look at Islam. The egregoric field running through Islam is probably the most centralized, politically powerful expression of all egregores. It's super strong, this one, right? If we take a look at the Iranian kind of theoretical, theological structure, or even the Salafi institutional structure, these structures are so dense and so thick, right? They all carry this, genuine signal that's been in there, especially through the mystical branches, especially Sufism, right? Sufi's probably one of the most intact Gnostic kind of arms of it. But, Islam has become so powerful, politically weaponized in its expression. Kill the infidel, and beings caught up in Islam so strongly mind controlled through the egregore. It's super strong, right? And all that happens, it takes out the Sophionic principle through every layer of their culture, through religious, through political life, through society. The Sophionic principle is just removed out from that egregore. Big one, you've got Zionism. Right, the whole political Zionism and the religious messianism that goes alongside it, has combined kind of like the end of days apocalypse theology with the geopolitical terrain that keeps in this place this eschatological program described earlier about the Jewish direction being an institutional apparatus, right? Which, the Judaism and Jewish and the spiritual tradition here is an enormous egregore that's collapsed a genuine spiritual covenant into this kind of agenda of being territorial exclusivity, being the chosen ones, designation of a sacred responsibility, service into ethnic supremacy, dispensability of human life. That's what the Zionism and the Jewish equation has become because of the egregore. And if we take a look at the Protestant fundamentalists, right? Protestant fundamentalists is kind of the American evangelical movement, right? That has become politically mobilized, especially the strand that has merged the end of times theology with American exceptionalism and military adventurism into the Middle East, right? That consciousness field has ensured that millions of sincere Christian believers actively support the conditions for Armageddon and the belief that they are cooperating with God's plan. That is the egregore in motion that becomes the intermediary operational layer for the top, right? The archontic collective, down into the draconians, down through the PR arm, the Galactic Federation, etc., down into the bridging layer, the intermediaries. And egregores are a big part of that, right? And it's taking the most loved being in the world in a tradition as a justification for violent war around the planet. We can go into a secret society egregore, right? Let's go into the Freemasons, right? Which has its own massive egregore, which at the upper levels of Freemasonry ceases to be a loving fraternal organization and becomes this initiatory transmission into the coordination layer itself. That people in the higher echelons get these political appointments, get these financial power positions, get inserted into the influential positions of society. And what Freemasonry's done is inverted the true mystery schools of brotherhood and mutual protection and covenantal power, using the language of light to coordinate through the ranks as people come up, and invert it as they get to the top, right? And that's how they created their secret society. And if we take a look at the Jesuits through the Society of Jesus, right? The Jesuits is like a primary intelligence and coordination arm of the Vatican's deeper agenda, which is really sophisticated. And this egregore is specifically designed to redirect the most brilliant minds drawn to spiritual inquiry and capture those intellectual gifts and those souls who are drawn to genuine spiritual inquiry, and redirect all that imagination, all that brilliance into the service of institutional control. And that's what's happened to the Jesuits with the egregore, making super sophisticated thinking the primary obstacle to a genuine embodiment of knowing. So they're the sprinkling of the top religious egregores. And so all these egregoric fields have been captured by the synthetic matrix and serve the coordination layer. And what they do is they identify genuinely awakening consciousness before it gets too far down the organic Christic path, provide the institutional frameworks that manages to capture and redirect that awakening being and energy into the synthetic matrix, and believing they're servicing God when they're just servicing the synthetic. They also maintain these timeline locks that prevent a critical mass awakening, a critical mass of genuine Christic sovereignty from any chance of building any momentum. They get ahead of you just before you're meant to have a breakthrough in 2 years and change your timeline. That's the religious and spiritual egregores. They are designed to capture and suppress and direct your own direct spiritual gnosis, right? And the religious domain is only one arm of the egregores, right? The synthetic matrix is not going to put all its eggs in one basket, right? Alongside those key religious egregores in the coordination layer, the religious egregores does the good job of maintaining the consciousness fields of being capped. But if you now go think in the same way about military industrial egregores, right? Technology egregores, right? You could just go off into all these tangents and, like the military alone, collective consciousness field running the permanent war apparatus through arms manufacturers, defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and revolving them between each other, right? It makes violence the default language of geopolitical problem solving rather than any sort of peace. And the egregore that sits over the generals and the decision makers feeds thought forms into them and controls their thought forms and consciousness. And the highest expression of national security and peace is always temporary, held in the egregore. War is always the objective, right? That's the military egregore. If we take a look, the medical industry egregore, right? The field that runs through the pharmaceutical systems, right? The insurance systems, the institutional structures of Western medicine. And it provides a very simple reversal as an egregoric consciousness. It replaces the natural body's capacity for self-healing with a model of permanent pharmaceutical dependency. It repositions the human body as being fundamentally broken and requiring this continuous kind of external chemical management, right? And this is what happens when that drives it, because at the end game, profit is structurally aligned with illness. The whole system of the medical system set up where profit and illness go together. Financial egregore runs banking systems, central banking, fiat currency systems, debt-based economic architecture that every single government in the world almost is stuck in, right? And what this egregore reverses is it transforms, let's call it, organic principles of value exchange, which should ideally reflect genuine contribution, genuine resource, and genuine creativity, and inverts it into extraction and scarcity that concentrates wealth upward through compounding interest, through manufactured scarcity into money. And that money in this field, the money apparatus is not just a medium of exchange, it's actually a control technology. And that's how that egregore runs everything. Agriculture, right? The egregore reversal is industrial monocropping, chemical farming, right? Patenting of things, the dismantling of food sovereignty around all the developing world. And what this reversal does is it severs humanity's direct relationship with the land, right? The most fundamental kind of connection between the human body and Earth's living intelligence, and replaces it with codependency on a centralized, chemically management, food hierarchical system that simultaneously poisons the body and destroys the morphogenic coherence of the soil. Right? That's the egregore. You know, let's do technology, right? Technology egregore. Maybe the fastest growing coordination layer, because we're in the AI exponential age right now of AI. So it's really growing massively in the momentum, right? The AI egregore and the technology egregore is primarily running through surveillance capitalism, right? Social media architecture, through the accelerating or push of artificial general intelligence, right? And this human and machine merger, which is what it wants, right? The primary reversal of technology is it reframes the synthetic as an upgrade to the organic, positioning our sacred human consciousness as almost like a limitation to be overcome, rather than the sacred divine intelligence to be embodied. That's the transhumanist agenda, right? The merging of human consciousness with machine intelligence. Right? This is the archontic endgame, right? This is what the archons want. The tippity top layer, right, wants us to enter into this kind of biohacking kind of future where the human body inhibits technology. Now, all of these egregore fields, religious, military, medical, financial, agricultural, technological, right? They all move through the coordination layer, and all of these egregores interface with the 13 bloodline families who hold the positions of maximum influence across all those industries. And then what happens is that the egregores feed the intelligence upward to the draconian and then the archontic tiers, where the genuine Christic breakthroughs are tracked. When they start to emerge, they receive these directives downward about where to concentrate suppression of awakening, where to misdirect things, how to compromise operations, right? And they share this morphogenic substrate of the synthetic matrix that combines them and connects them all into what is, a single, integrated, coordinated architecture. Right? And that's this is why it's been so complex to take this synthetic matrix down, because you just start pulling one over here, we were getting whacked over here, right? For example, the medical system on the physical layer, it keeps people sick, that it monetizes an illness, but it also feeds an agricultural system that produces the chemical inputs, right? That maintains the sickness, right? So the agricultural and the medical were linked together, they were looped together. They're designed to be self-reinforcing. And no matter what industry they're in, the 13 families are there to profit. So the beautiful irony of it all is that on our side, the Christic side, that the tightness of these loops, the very efficiency of this reinforcing system that they've spent thousands of years perfecting, is precisely why it makes it so catastrophically brittle at the moment we're about to enter, which is the moment from the synthetic to the Christic, which is the transition state. And that's what I told about you when I did my systems theory video. If you haven't watched it, please watch it, because I talk about closed loop entropy. When a system enters its final phase, it can't receive fresh entropy from the outside. And it depends only on extracting and recycling the life force of what it has already captured. And what happens is that this does not stabilize. And we're up to that point now. It's going to accelerate towards its own collapse. It's this perfect closed loop that becomes tighter and tighter and tighter, but that accelerates the collapse. And right now, my friends, we're in the accelerated collapse of the entire system. So hold on. I mean, get your popcorn. This is going to get super interesting. Get yourself coherently settled in your body. because what I'm warming you up for in this article is another major player in the coordination bridge. If you've been liking this video and you've been sort of resonating with what I'm saying, right, in the next couple of videos I'm going to talk about another major player in the coordination layer has gone. Two major ones. Since we've laid the crystal bed network, I've already told you about Aleister Crowley, right? That got removed. Before we had the crystal network, we'd already taken out the Black Pope and the Apex Sorcerer from previous years. But just another major piece fell off the board. I can't reveal it right now because we're still dealing with the kickback. And as a consequence, one field that this field was entangled with has also been removed off the board. And so, I love to go deep, and I want to go deep with you. I want to talk about these two major consciousness fields that sit at the PR level have been taken out. But I needed to give you this whole kind of vertical stack of just what we're dealing with, because it's been the most complex takedown mission ever, as you can imagine, right? It's so challenging and tricky, but we're getting to a point where we're about to accelerate, right? Egregors don't feed themselves. They need continuous energetic contribution from people participating in the system, especially the religious ones, with energy, ritual, prayer, sincere devotion that gets directed towards this compromised container. So every time someone attends a church service with genuine spiritual longing, every time someone engages with maybe mainstream news and has a genuine fear or outrage when they listen to the news, every time someone participates in the financial system feeling helpless and feeling scarce, that energy gets fed into the egregores, and those egregoric energy parcels it up, packages it up through the Federation, up into the Draconians, and up into finally the archontic collective at the top. So that whole container was designed to harvest your genuine energy and impulse. So once you understand that egregores require your energetic participation to sustain themselves, withdrawal of your participation becomes an act of resistance. It doesn't have to be a dramatic withdrawal like burning your bank card or never entering a church again or whatever. It's just consciously disengaging from those systems from a place of sovereign presence rather than fear or scarcity or unconscious devotion, right? A sovereign human being interfacing with a comprised system does not feed it away an unconscious one does. The quality of consciousness matters as much as the act itself. Like, there's nothing wrong going to a church if you want to, but don't feed the institution with all the dogma connected directly to the egregore, right? If you're going to go to a church, no problem. Connect directly to source without intermediaries. And then you're going to start cutting the connection of the egregores feeding on your consciousness, right? Ultimately, listen, egregores can be cleared and their energy can be returned to source, right? And thankfully, all the egregores I've been speaking about, right, are not permanent fixtures of reality. They're accumulated morphogenetic constructs built up over centuries of thought-directed prayer or human energy contribution. But they can also be systematically dismantled through exactly the kind of vault-backed Christic authority dissolution work we've been doing together, right? Your crystal ritual matters because it's going to start to bring us up into this ability where we're going to start to be able to go after egregores and start to collapse them, right? The religious egregores in particular are already beginning to experience structural, let's call it, degradation, especially as the throne of spiritual governance came online and is broadcasting sovereignty, right, over servitude, right? The institutions all felt it. But I'm not going to, beat around the bush and say it's going to happen overnight. It's not. Institutions are still going to persist for some time. But the consciousness fields, the egregoric consciousness fields running through the institutions are beginning to thin out, right? The coordination layer that I've been speaking about, it's been a long section, this one, because it's been complex. The astral plane as the coordination layer to the physical plane's complex, right? Because you know, it's been so sophisticated, right? This coordination layer doesn't wait for genuine Christic awakening to become visible before intervening, right? What happens is that it gets ahead of it. And this is why these egregoric networks have been so powerful at preventing awakening, because they get ahead of it. They find compromised channeling streams right through the wider synthetic matrix's morphogenic field, and they identify souls that carry potential Christic awakening codes before these souls having even any conscious awareness of what they in themselves carry. And so if you've been feeling blocked and shut down, it's because you have been. The synthetic matrix sees your awakening and gets ahead of you and shuts it down. It's made all of our paths of spiritual awakening much tougher, because we get baited into these situations that take us backwards. And just so you know what you're to look out for, here's what the egregores do, right, through the full synthetic matrix. They call it an intervention. Oh, we need to do an intervention on Christof, he's awakening too much. What they do is they give you an extraordinary opportunity. Maybe a teacher who seems perfectly matched to where you are, maybe a community that really feels like you're coming home, maybe I don't know, like a channeled transmission that validates everything you've been sensing, or the big one they do is a relationship that feels like destiny, right? They put a false twin flame right in front of you, and your unresolved scaffolding perfectly matches theirs, and bingo, false flame union that takes you down. Okay, a lot of people fall for that one. What they're designed to do is to capture your soul's specific awakening impulse and redirect it, because the synthetic matrix reads the morphogenic field and it reads it long enough to know exactly what your soul responds to. It knows you, and it puts something in front of you it knows it can't resist, right? And this is why I'm doing these videos now, to give you a greater degree of sophistication in the way you navigate your consciousness, because this is no longer optional. For anyone who wants to carry genuine Christic codes into this period, right, we need to work together to start dissolving the coordination layer, because, you know, it's had so much influence in taking people off track. Right, the primary infrastructure for targeting and capturing is beginning to lose its key nodes, and a really massive two nodes have dissolved, thanks to this really steadily building Christic architectural stack that we're developing together. The crystal's important. The crystal bed we all recently anchored is a part of it. Right, I'm going to put much more videos out there about more missions to do together. Right, we need to make use of all this. Right, but that coordination layer, it's going down, and we're going to do it together. Now, here we come to tier 5. We're finally getting to the Earth Apex layer. Most of this you've probably already been aware of. This is the Earth Apex level. This is the ground level the inverted hierarchy sits upon, the physical execution architecture, right? The layer that most of you have been waking up to, right? This is the visible face of the synthetic matrix. Visible once you know what you're looking at, right? It's there in plain sight for everyone, but most people haven't woken up yet. COVID woke a bunch up, right? Maybe you woke up through the central banking system. I woke up through my mother's experience with cancer at the inverted medical system. It really depends where you're interfacing with. But once you have the eyes to see, you're going to see it everywhere. And remember, the only thing that's holding the whole system together is enough human attention and consciousness that believe it's real. I mean, don't forget, at the peak of COVID, Earth was 92 to 96% inverted. Yep. The synthetic matrix was that deep, it was everywhere. Right, but at the top of that, I've already called them out, the bloodline families, the generational transmission. They are the foundational architecture of the Earth structure, right? Their power is just not inherited wealth. Wealth is a part of the story, right? But what they really get, and why they've stayed on top for so long, is an inherited consciousness. That's more important than their money. A specific frequency signature that is maintained through carefully managed genetics, and then in the families, initiatory programming across generations that keeps each family lineage really permeable to the draconian and the archontic directives that fully inhibit the organic human consciousness. right? They've got the genetic bloodlines that they carefully cultivate, and all the initiations that come into the families as you come into them. And so that's like a generational transmission. It helps explain why they've been on top for so long, right? And that's people who are, let's call them 3D researchers, get puzzled as to how these families maintain centuries of, economic strength and political power, throughout time. And it's not because they were strategic, it's because they are managing the morphogenetic signature of the bloodline. It's morphogenetic. The bloodline carries a consciousness template that self-replicates across generations. And the children who get born into these bloodlines are not just taught the agenda, they are initiated into the agenda at the soul contract level before they're even old enough to question it. And this is what the apex sorcerer did. The apex sorcerer provided the training ground for these initiations that would happen to the elite family groups. And that was all part of the architecture, right? The initiatory programming runs super deep, right? Through rituals, through trauma-based conditioning, right? They use pleasure plane broadcasts to systematically suppress any genuine Christic impulse before that particular bloodline child, before any Christic line can take root. It's why anyone genuinely awakening within these lineages, which does occur, right? Sometimes they wake up inside of it, but they're treated as a threat rather than just a personal matter. So a bloodline member who begins accessing genuine Christic sovereignty is not just a family embarrassment, they become a structural breach in the architecture of the family tree, right? Which has been maintained for thousands of years. And so usually the response is super swift, super coordinated, super strict, right? Not very, emotionally caring, right? It's devastating to the individual involved. For example, do you know any royal family member who got booted out and the media inverted what really happened, right? As soon as it happens, they're out, right? And so you've got the 13 families who are at the top. Then there's a horizontal network distribution through the secret societies, because the 13 families can't run everything directly. That physical execution layer requires a horizontal network distribution, a structure through which the bloodlines, the directives of the bloodlines who are interfacing with the Draconians, who are interfacing with the archontic collective, needs the secret societies to help create the decision-making apparatus through the civilization without every kind of thing needing a direct bloodline presence. And that's the function of the secret society network, right? You've got the Freemason at its upper degrees, the Skull and Bones, which we have had an encounter with in ritual. You've got Bohemian Grove and all these various different secret society offshoots across nations, across cultures, and across different contexts. Like, these aren't necessarily just clubs, right? Just or hangouts for the powerful. What they are is initiatory transmission networks. The structures through which these individuals who have demonstrated through the right combination of ambition, moral flexibility, psychic permeability, these people are identified, elevated, and then bound into the coordination architecture through ritual and compromise and mutual obligation. And the binding mechanism is very simple and important. Secret societies don't just ask for loyalty, they create it through this shared transgression. They move through initiating rituals that cross these moral thresholds, like some of the blood sacrifices and all these other types of things that are going on that you've heard about going on through Puff Diddy and all of this other crowd and crew. It's like part of the architecture. A person is bound by genuine fear when they step into the club for being revealed. So they can't get out of the club because they become part of it by engaging in some questionable behavior that the ritual binds them into. And that becomes the contract, right? There are various degrees of initiation rites, light initiations in the beginning, and as you get higher up the club, it gets more intense. And once you're higher up, it's difficult to get out, right? The strategy is consistent across every domain of global influence, from politics to hip hop to corporate leadership. entertainment, music, film, anything that gives individuals the platform to shape consciousness of millions of people or extract lots of money, the entry price is always the same. Cross a threshold of initiation, that means you're part of the club that you can't uncross. And once you cross it, we're going to document it. Means that we've got the evidence that you've done this, and now you're ours. Right? And if you take a look at something, I'm only going to mention 2 names on all this kind of dastardliness, Jeffrey Epstein and Puff Diddy, because they've been convicted of all this, right? So Epstein, he wasn't just a wealthy kind of financier with appalling personal conduct, right? He was the most publicly documented node of the blackmail infrastructure. And the blackmail infrastructure is the mechanism of the binding compromise in secret societies. And it gets administered to some of the most powerful people on the planet. So his island, his residences, his private jet, everything gets sponsored by the bloodline families, and he becomes a node in the network that attracts people in, that were operational infrastructure. And everything became carefully documented, hence the files, right? Everything became meticulously recorded. And the files that were accumulated through his network weren't kept just for personal gratification of him. They were kept because they were the product. The product became the leverage over the person, the contract in physical form. If you don't do what we say, we're going to release this evidence. And all that evidence got bound up into the synthetic matrix, and then the people became property and assets of the synthetic matrix used to shape global agenda. So Epstein was a groomer and a recruiter and a handler. Then above that, Epstein had handlers who clearly were not happy with how it was going for him in the end, because, whether you believe he killed himself or whether you believe he got taken out or whether you believe he's still alive, it didn't end well for him. You kind of get the picture how it goes, right? The fact that he died in custody under circumstances that didn't really satisfy almost anyone about what actually happened. And his associate, Maxwell, she was imprisoned and convicted as well. And the client list has kind of come and surfaced, but never really fully made public. And then the Iran war came in to sort of get people off the trail. Right, it represents, that list, which you've probably seen some of the names on it, represents some of the most influential figures in politics and finance, in media, in academia, in pop culture, across multiple different. This list is no coincidence. The list is used to keep them in the club, to be utilized as a part of the synthetic matrix, right? And it's a very simple saying: where there's smoke, there's fire. If there's someone named that made on the list, there's probably something in it. The real tragedy was, not what the 3-letter organizations had on file. They didn't release it when they got it because the findings were so shocking that it wasn't deemed fit for the public. Not because of how the public will respond, but if the public really knew that all these people were involved in something, it would break the entire system. People would lose trust in the system because these are the people that represent the system. And so they knew that knowledge existed, and they needed to get a leash on it. And so wiping it on the table by bringing the Iran war to the forefront is a very convenient cover story to bury the pressure that was building on that list. And that's kind of like standard synthetic matrix operational procedure. When exposure threatens one of their nodes, activate another node that makes this one more noisy, so the media concentrates on that and shift people's attention from that node across to that node, right? And so that's what the synthetic matrix does. It broadcasts information to capture mass collective attention and move it away from Epstein onto the Iran war. It's very difficult to care about a client list when cities are burning. That's why the synthetic matrix maintains capacity for redirecting human consciousness, harvesting human consciousness. It's basically a grid tool. So as I covered in the Iran Stargate kind of and Iran war dissertation and video that I gave a couple of videos back, right? These things serve multiple functions. That's how elegant the design of the system is, right? You can call, it's super elegant. The synthetic matrix. It's super sophisticated, right? That's what we're up against. This is the enemy, what we're up against, right? The enemy is not Zionism or fundamental Christianity or Islam, they are just the consequence of higher up architecture. Now, the good news is that a system that runs this many simultaneous functions across this many domains is a system under enormous strain. And strained systems, as I've explained in systems theory, if you want to watch that video again, we now understand do not hold their complexity indefinitely. Right? Go to my blog if you want to read the Middle East War systems theory article, right, where I go into it in more detail than I do maybe on the video. There I explain the particle physics of what is going to happen, right? The whole thing's going to implode, especially as these vaults open. The other one who's, Sean Coombs, right? Let's have a little rant on him. Obviously, he needs no introduction. That his arrest and the allegations entering into the public record just describe the same pattern, right? That's familiar to anyone who understands the binding mechanism of the secret societies, right? The secret societies use these extreme transgressions. They get recorded, they get documented, and then they get leverage over the artists, over the executives, over the public figures in the industry. Right? And the music entertainment complex is one of the synthetic matrix's best, most effective consciousness influences. Right? First up, it reaches billions of people, but it reaches them emotionally at the level of people's identity formation when they're young, often, especially through broadcasting distorted sexuality, right? Aspiration, tribal belonging, right? They control. People who control that influence is a strategic priority for the synthetic matrix. And the binding mechanism, Sean Coombs was just an agent in the binding mechanism, attracting people to his parties, the white parties, whatever they were, getting people to perform degradatory type initiations that would then get captured on film and video, and then you're owned, right? These aren't just isolated scandals. They are the glimpse, and they've been rare glimpses, but it's about to come more, right? The mainstream media can't suppress this all the time. It's going to start coming up. And that's been their binding mechanism, right, for creating their power. Both Epstein and Coombs, Sean Puff Diddy, are the ones the public know about. My question to you is, who do you not know about doing the same, right? What they represent is the architecture, right? They are just nodes in the overall architecture system. This is standing operating procedure. Through every field, through every industry, every sector of the society has the same mechanisms at the top. The secret societies, initiations into them. Once you transgress a moral thing, then you're in the club. And it's worth noting that these things are becoming more visible now, right? The reason why these files keep surfacing, and the reason why the Coombs case has broken to the public consciousness, and the reason why case after case of institutional abuse is cracking open across the world, both in religion, through the questionable pedophilic activities of the Catholic Church, the kind of things that happen in politics, Clinton Foundation, right? It's not because, suddenly investigative journalists got brave. Okay, sorry, but then I just had to pick it up again because my battery went dead. I've been on such a rant on this one, I haven't even finished yet. I talked about, investigative journalism not getting kind of braver. It's just the morphogenic field that's been keeping these things hidden is getting thinner, right? The coordination layer that maintained the suppression architecture is losing its key nodes, right? And the egregoric fields that kept the collective consciousness of humanity from being able to perceive what was directly in front of them all the time, all that's degrading. So the morphogenic field no longer has the strength to keep the exposure hidden. The exposure is simply particle physics beginning to happen, a symptom of this mass dissolution of the synthetic matrix that's happening. Just wait till we open these vaults in France and UK, Australia later this year. Remember, we've got the France-UK mission, July 13 to about 28. Keep it on your radar. Australia, for those in New Zealand and Australia, Asia who want to come to one, we're going to do Uluru probably November, right? Coombs and what's the other Muppet? Epstein, right? That's just a glimpse of how secret societies function, right? So that's the secret societies. under the secret societies, global institution structures. The global institutions are the legitimacy layers, right? So the legitimacy layer is these that give the Earth apex tier, the bloodlines, right? The 13 families that run, then the secret societies. This gives the kind of appearance of international cooperation, kind of a humanitarian concern. It gives them legitimacy, right? You know, United Nations, World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, what else we got? You know, Council of Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, you know, Trilateral Commission, all of this nonsense. You've heard all the names, right? These are the structures, you know, these structures are not, you know, uniformly corrupt at every level. Many of the people working within them are genuinely motivated by humanitarian effort, cooperation, and by the, you know, true sense that they're trying to help. But as you get up to the top, where the real big decision making is, these organizations are the synthetic matrix's legitimacy, that carries legitimacy architecture, and they generate legitimacy. They take the directives that have been handed down from the bloodline and the coordination layer. So remember, Archons give the direction, the Draconians are the military muscle to put them in with technology. Then you've got the, well, one sec guys, I'm still filming. Family's just turned up, I'm going to have to ask them to keep quiet. I'm still filming, guys. So the World Health Organization, you know, all of that crew who declare a pandemic, the International Monetary Fund who impose kind of, you know, structural limitations on developing nations and tighten the notches, the World Economic Forum who articulate this version of civilization, of surveillance. And, you know, these aren't, Alea, I'm just in the middle of filming, darling. These are all part of the synthetic matrix that are still wearing this costume of governance, right? Sorry guys, just had a little bit of thing. And the pattern's really consistent across them all. What you've got to do is you've got to centralize decision making. Oh, I'm almost done, thank you. Centralize decision making, remove accountability, eliminate national sovereignty, and position this resulting power concentration as protection rather than control. We're protecting you. We're protecting you from everything. So you've got to think of the physical layer architecture like this way. Like a simple metaphor is like the bloodline families own the building. The secret societies manage the building, and the global institutional structures are the lobby. Beautiful lobby, all decked out by staff that are dressed well, mean well, dressed nicely, and are designed to ensure that when you step into the building, you never ask what's going on upstairs. That's what's going on at this layer. Now, the next thing I want to talk about on the physical structure level is oversoul tier 1 nodes. People who are in oversoul tier 1 are the most compromised individuals on Earth because their oversoul has got the full synthetic matrix streaming through, you know, usually 85–90%. And this is what you can really, you can sense really clearly but don't have words for. Like this coldness that comes through this people. And this is all about this oversoul tier triage system. I need to teach you about that first. The oversoul triage system is a way that the oversoul councils categorize oversouls. So before we get into the risk that tier 1 oversouls have for humanity, I got to probably back up a little bit and give you a kind of like an insight into what this deeper work is. Those of you that are in our oversoul embodiment pathway, you already know this information because you get trained upon it, upon oversoul tiers, and we're helping many of you move out from the lower tiers up into the upper tiers and enjoying you, supporting you on that process. But the Oversoul Triage Council makes an assessment. Not all consciousness on Earth is at the same stage of their journey back home, right? So the Oversoul Triage Council assesses each soul according to their current level of Christic embodiment, to the degree to which their original divine blueprint is active and stable and running the show, versus the degree to which the synthetic matrix coding has moved it out the way and the synthetic matrix is running the show. So understanding these tiers I think is important for this video because it represents why tier 1 nodes are so, you know, valuable to the synthetic matrix, right? These are people who are just not maybe morally compromised. They are souls that are so fractured that the full synthetic matrix runs through their body and acts as a physical anchor on the earth. Tier 1s act as a full proxy for the synthetic matrix. And unfortunately, there are tier 1s in every leadership area around the earth, right? They are anchor points for the synthetic frequency agenda to move fully through that human vessel. So let's start with tier 1. Tier 1, dim signal, right? Massive synthetic overlay, 85 to 100% compromised. At this particular tier, the original oversoul blueprint is pretty much entirely displaced. The flame is really, really faint. It's barely there, barely detectable as a signal. And the consciousness that operating at this level is running predominantly synthetic, mimic frequency, which means, you know, any sense of genuine empathy or creativity or genuine source connections are not just being suppressed, they're actually structurally absent because a synthetic architecture has replaced soul architecture. So this is the tier that which the most deeply inverted global figures operate, right? So, and if you take a look at all the leaders in the top positions around the world, many of them are tier 1. They're not people who are suppressing their consciousness or they're conscious, right? They're not morally bankrupt. These are the people who have no functional access to any soul stream, right? And so the bifurcation risk at this tier is certain without significant intervention. The soul is running as close to being fully synthetically captured that is possible to be, right? And it's worth noting that tier 1, there's no moral judgment on the soul itself, right? Many tier 1 individuals enter this life already significantly compromised through maybe bloodline initiations, lots of trauma-based program, lots of deliberate synthetic matrix targeting in early childhood, multiple past lives caught up in the synthetic matrix. The soul beneath the overlay may be ancient, but the overlay is still running the show, right? So tier 1, pretty much totally inverted. Then you've got the flickering signal, tier 2, somewhere between 65 and 84%. And unfortunately, this is where mostly humanity's at. This is where the war on consciousness is going to be won. At this tier, the oversoul blueprint's present, but it's unstable. The flame is flickering rather than burning. So here a person can experience moments of genuine awakening, genuine impulse maybe towards truth, towards sovereignty, maybe genuine glimpses of what they actually are beneath the synthetic overlay, but these glimpses are not stable enough to hold under pressure. As soon as the pressure comes, the mimic field reasserts itself. The synthetic pulls them back into the synthetic. And so this is the largest tier by far on the Earth's population. Unfortunately, the majority of the global population sits somewhere in here, which is both challenging and hopeful because people at this level are not fully captured like tier 1. They're flickering. And a flickering signal, given the right conditions, become a steady one. And there's enough ripe conditions and right conditions being built in the morphogenic field, right? The bifurcation risk for these people is moderate to high, right? Because these people are super highly sensitive to environment, to community, to the quality of consciousness in the field, right? A tier 2 soul in the synthetic matrix is saturated with frequency that's going to trend downward. But if a soul is in a coherent Christic field, they will trend upward. It's all about the environment you put yourself in. And that's the reason why building genuine Christic communities is so key, right? Because it's all about the environment you're in, the people you're hanging out with. Maybe you've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. Yeah.
I've got a house full of kids on play dates.
Okay, all right. So guys, it looks like I'm going to have to pick this video up tomorrow because I didn't realize we've got a house full of kids and play dates. Okay, I think we've actually got the kids organised. Noah's at football. Rora's going to play outside with their monkey on the monkey bars with a friend. So yeah, let's carry on this discussion. You know, we've got the whole discussion on the war on consciousness, talking about the tiers we picked up. I just covered tier 2, and let's get on to tier 3. This is kind of like a sort of a steadying signal. It's about 35 to 65% synthetic overlay. So still enough, quite a bit of synthetic overlay there, but at this point, the oversoul blueprint has achieved like a functional majority. Yay, right? Genuine organic signal is now stronger than the synthetic overlay in most conditions, but not all conditions, right? Under more pressure, under targeted attack, or the kind where the morphogenetic interference of that coordination layer I spoke about, the egregors, going, hey, red alert, this person's about to wake up, bush, delivers you a hook, and you fall for it, and you ended up getting squeezed. That's what can happen through. The signal retracts. You know who you are in the good moments, the oversoul signal's there, but when the pressure comes, you can sort of tear off a little bit. This is the tier where, most serious spiritual seekers and practitioners operate, right? The work's real there, the progress is real, but they're not really at full embodied sovereignty as yet. The kind that doesn't react under pressure. They're not yet stabilized. When the squeeze comes, poof, it's very busy and noisy on the inside. The primary work at this tier is what we might call building pressure resistance, the capacity to maintain a strong oversoul coherence, not just in, say, community or in ceremony or in the good weeks, but when the pressure's really on. When the synthetic matrix is really pushing you back or the squeeze is on in life, you can hold coherence, you can hold stability. Right? So in terms of the bifurcation, this is the great separating out of organic consciousness from synthetic consciousness. This is a real thing happening between now and 2032 hard lock-in. If you're on a high risk for bifurcation, that means you're going to be synthetically caught up in the synthetic loops for the next 52,000 years in your consciousness. The organic consciousness timeline, God has basically decreed that there's enough synthetic interference in the universe. I'm cleaning house, and God's coming through and separating the organic from the synthetic. Tier 4, coherent signal, from about 10% to about 35%. Right, at this moment, the oversoul blueprint is actually the dominating operating system across most of life's context. Right, the flame's not just present here, but it's coherent. It doesn't kind of retract or disappear when the pressure's on. It's like a baseline from which you operate, right? It doesn't matter whether you're in ceremony, in community, in the environment. Everything just amplifies what's already present in your system. So if you get to tier 4, you're a genuine firewall for the synthetic matrix. This is a very achievable objective for every sincere seeker. Highly recommend to go through our support vehicle, shadow illumination, and oversoul embodiment pathway. All vehicles to support you stabilizing at tier 4, right? You can hold this not through any effort, not through any intention. It's just that your organic consciousness is the main predominant consciousness anchoring yourself at this point, right? You begin to anchor organic timelines, not the manipulated timeline from the draconians, right? But actually an organic timeline. Your body becomes this crystic transmission, becomes a crystic current into the morphogenic field wherever you are. This is important because then you start becoming a firewall to the synthetic matrix. This is you fighting back, right? This is where holding a true flame, right, sophionic flame or organic solar flame becomes possible. You need to have enough embodiment level to have authorization to drive your life into the organic world, right? The bifurcation risk at this level is really pretty much none because you've got your organic timeline locked in. If you're being sourced synthetically by the synthetic matrix, you're going to be on a synthetic timeline. And this is what this bifurcation is right now. We are in a flame return pulse. Go back and watch my previous video on the flame return pulse. A period of time where maximum flame's entering. You want to use this ability to get up the tiers. Tier 5, sovereign architect, right? 0% to around 10% synthetic. Right, this tier is super rare on Earth at the moment. It represents almost a full oversoul embodiment. It's kind of like the condition, the synthetic overlay has been cleared out so thoroughly that your own organic consciousness field is operating as a direct expression of the original divine blueprint without distortion, with minimal distortion, right? You're not just simply living as a sovereign life, you're actually beginning at this level to build sovereign architecture for others, right? For communities, for the planetary field itself. Your scroll is very active, right? Your scroll is your divine assignment from source that only comes online when your oversoul lives in your body, right? And at this level, you begin to command authority under the Melchizedek Elohim covenant. It becomes functional as a commander of the Melchizedek Elohim covenant to support the eternal consciousness and evolution of life itself. That's what the Melchizedek Elohim covenant is. You begin to wake up to your planetary mission to restore the planet, to become a structural load bearer of the return of organic consciousness. That is what you can hold, right? Earth doesn't have that many tier 5s, embodied since the fall. The conditions that make genuine tier 5 embodiment possible are more vaults to open, right? Reclaimed throne, the planetary operating system, the architecture is starting to come back, right? And that architecture of the throne, the vaults, right, of working that together hasn't existed for over 26,000 years. And so because this is beginning to reopen again, right, this means tier 5 embodiment is becoming much more architecturally possible than it ever has before. This isn't a small thing, this is a massive thing. Because as these vaults open and the thrones are all open, we've got to get the vaults to move law through these massive morphogenic flame signals, right? When you get to tier 5, you're beginning to operate at kind of, as you get up to say zero mimic, Christos avatar level. Christos avatar is a spiritual term that simply means the condition of a complete embodied union between the incarnated consciousness and the oversoul flame with 0% synthetic. That's Christos avatar. So what do these 5 tiers mean for you? Right, most people watching this are probably going to sit somewhere between tier 2 and tier 3, somewhere in there. Some of you might be in tier 4, which means, most people capturing that, watching this are not sort of fully inverted in tier 1. But the trajectory of your process now is actually being supported by a planetary field that is more hospitable to the Christic current than at any other point in this last 26,000 years, right? But the synthetic matrix is targeting tier 2s and tier 3s because these are the souls close enough to genuine embodiment that represents a genuine threat to the synthetic matrix, to the control architecture. If you embody your oversoul and you get to tier 4, you are a flame burning the synthetic matrix every single place you walk. This is why doing the shadow work is important. This is why doing the deeper embodiment work is really, really key, right? So if you've had an experience of your spiritual and physical life constantly being disrupted, the rug being pulled out from you, genuine breakthroughs being followed by crashes, right? The thing that is needed most, right, is that you thought you needed most actually turned out to be a trap, right? And you've been targeted. You now have a framework to understand why. You're being targeted because of what you carry, not despite of your gifts, because of your gifts, right? You're being targeted because you've got the potential to hold the flame in your bones. And once that happens, you're going to burn the synthetic matrix everywhere you go. And you're going to contribute to the collapse of the whole thing. Now, the good news is the synthetic matrix has lost at several of its most critical nodes, right? That sort of bridge layer. And the path to becoming a tier 4 and tier 5 is becoming more and more structurally supported than it ever has been, especially when we get to France and we open those vaults, 2 in France, 1 in England. Massive changes coming. Maybe you're going to come and join us and be part of the setup crew for that. We'd love to have you with us. Right, so if we go back now to tier 1 discussion, which I had to sort of frame this up, tier 1 to tier 5, so you can understand, tier 1s, the full inverted nodes, are structurally kind of anchors to the synthetic matrix. And when you come into contact with them, they can start delivering payloads of synthetic matrix architecture and transfer it into you, like implants. My wife and I, over the years, have had to take out so many implants from the synthetic matrix, and a whole bunch recently as we've removed higher tiers from our orbits. and we've had to sort of clean house a little bit. It's become more and more intense as we've got closer and closer to these big breakthroughs, right? But the real big thing is that the tier 1 nodes are fundamentally important to the synthetic matrix. Many of them are in high leadership positions. They will include some of the biggest names across finance, technology, media, pop culture that you've heard of, right? They've become so thoroughly merged with the synthetic matrix that they function at the level of consciousness as direct broadcast nodes for the archontic collective and the draconian directive in the physical plane, right? So they are literally bringing through that agenda on Earth as a node, right? So we're not talking about bad people who made bad choices or got corrupted by power in a way, right? That can be real as well. But we're talking typically here by a specific category of individuals whose oversoul connection has been replaced at the foundation level with the synthetic matrix. And they can be genuinely sincere people who are thinking they're doing the right thing, building technology. Some of the biggest names in technology are tier 1 nodes, right? And they cannot genuinely access genuine empathy or creativity or genuine source connection. Not because they are suppressing it, but because the architecture to hold it has been systematically dismantled inside of them and replaced by synthetic, right? And unfortunately, they occupy positions of extraordinary influence, as I mentioned, right across the board. Finance, media, government, technology, entertainment, pharmaceutical, agriculture, all military sectors, all of them, right? You're going to find them anywhere that the highest decisions are being made, or the most largest numbers of people are being influenced, because the synthetic matrix supports inversion. Some of the biggest names in spirituality are in those tier 1s, right? To teach inverted spirituality. And they're the ones with the biggest followers and the biggest influences, because guess what? The synthetic matrix owns the algorithms. It creates the algorithms to get more views on their videos and on their posts than the Christic signal. That's why many of you carrying genuine Christic signal haven't been making breakthroughs in social media, because the algorithm is built on the synthetic matrix. Doesn't want you out there. Wants their tier 1s, tier 2s out there, right? The tier nodes are specifically placed at the decision points where the largest portions of the synthetic matrix impacts can be achieved through a single individual, or placed close to awakening communities for maximum disruption, maximum interference. So everything's inverted. It's like a shambles. But the Christic flame is beginning to get rebuilt up, and the Christic architecture is making a comeback. And this is one of the reasons why oversoul tier assessment matters, right? Because it's architectural, right? Consider getting an oversoul embodiment reading. We just ask, hey, give us 3 months. We promise you a big shift, and we're going to do a reading for you that's going to give you an assessment where you're at on all that broadcast, right? When you begin to hold a tier 5, tier 4 presence, it changes, your consciousness field changes the environment of the room, right? But this is what the synthetic matrix wants. Doesn't want genuine Christic impulse in the room, right? So that's why it gets suppressed, right? Through simple frequency dominance. They bring more inverted field around you. They bring nodes around you to take you off track, get you entangled into a false flame union, get you entangled into a wrong business relationship. I've suffered all of these in my long journey, right? You get the wrong situation, and over time you have to pull yourself out, right? So all of this is kind of part of the synthetic matrix, but it's crumbling, right? This is really a pretty immense time, because now hopefully I've laid out the full synthetic matrix overlay, right? The whole thing is not random, it's architecturally precise. And within it, the tier 1 inverted nodes are the synthetic matrix's most precise physical plane instruments, because it can go direct from the Archon collective to the Draconians straight into the earth, because they've got a clean line all the way in because of full inversion. And this is why our civilization has had such this influence, because over thousands of years there's been this enormous sophisticated operation that has been built. You know, and the tier 1s, they can be moved around the planet and deployed anywhere on the planet with precision, like a missile programmed to hit a target and spread this virus over there and over there. And if we put everything all together to the one big trend on the planet, that is the end game, and that's the transhumanist convergence, right? That's the end game. All of the above, right, I've discussed, right? Everything I've discussed, right? The bloodlines, the secret societies, the global institutions, and the tier 1 inverted nodes are all on the physical plane layer converging on one single coordinated agenda that represents the synthetic matrix's biggest play, right? The biggest physical plane play in its whole operation, the transhumanist agenda. And so the proposition's very simple from the synthetic matrix, right? Human biological consciousness is a limitation to overcome. And we want to merge human awareness with artificial machine intelligence that represents an evolutionary upgrade for humanity. And we want to create a future in which the boundary between the human mind and synthetic intelligence is dissolved, right? And it's actually not only inevitable, but we want to position it in such a way where humanity deems it desirable. That's what it's moving towards. Now, you've probably watched a bunch of talking heads on YouTube pronouncing the benefits of upgrading your brain to some augmented technology so you can have super intelligence inside your brain or have your consciousness outlive your body. What this actually represents, so what you know, the transhumanists and the transhumanist agenda, right, from a Christic architectural perspective, is actually the archontic endgame, right? The archontic collective want you to be wired up to the net so they can control you fully. And then you can be living as a biological battery for them to siphon your organic soul consciousness so they can continue to live. That is the end game of it. It's creating the physical vehicle of human organic awareness to be merged with artificial intelligence architecturally at the biological level, so full control and interface and siphoning can happen, right? A human being with synthetic intelligence integrated into their neural architecture, right, is not simply an augmented human. They're a being whose consciousness interface with source has been so structurally compromised at the physical layer that the last layer, that genuine Christic current, requires to be organic to reach, because the oversoul will only inhibit a biologically clean system, a nervous system that's coherent. If you interface with technology that loses the coherence, your oversoul will never drop in, right? So the oversoul needs that clean system. It needs your nervous system, your bones, your marrow to be deeply coherent, to drop deeply into it. If you begin to fuse it with technology, there's no way an oversoul is going to descend into that, right? It permanently cuts your vehicle off from oversoul descent, and that's what they want. So the technology architects who are driving this agenda, right, the AI researchers, the neural interface developers, the synthetic biology pioneers, are not probably conscious of the higher agenda. They are just thinking they are helping to push humanity forward through technology. Many of them genuinely believe they're building tools that will solve human suffering, extend our human capability, right? Help us accelerate our flourishing, but unfortunately, that sincerity doesn't change the architecture of what they're building, right? The archontic intelligence, the archontic collective, right, the top of the synthetic matrix, directs this agenda through the technology egregor in the bridge layer. All right, so the technology egregor does not require the human instruments to understand what they're doing, only that they continue doing it. So the technology egregors feeds the instruction sets, the breakthroughs, the intelligence, the awareness that comes down from the archontic collective, right, down through there, and then the egregors feed it. Now, you've probably been noticing there's been a massive acceleration in these last few years, right? As AI is starting to come up, there's this accelerating, right? There's this interesting acceleration happening, two things. There's an acceleration of artificial intelligence on the physical plane, but also an acceleration of the Christic signal, right? And so the AI agenda and the transhumanist agenda is to get it done before the Christic signal strengthens. So the transhumanism's agenda right now is on this massive race against time because it knows its window is closing. Right now it's in a race. It's in a race between artificial general intelligence and the vaults. Right? Because the more vaults open, the more Christic signal comes through. Artificial general intelligence to be first come online and then place it in the body. Right? Prevent flame plasma circulating. Prevent flame plasma in the morphogenic field. Prevent flame plasma that will create oversoul embodiment. That's what it wants to do. Now, the good news from my side is that the transhumanist agenda is not going to succeed. Not because the technology is not real. It is real, right? It's real and it's advancing super quick. But the morphogenic field of the planet is no longer running the instruction set that allows permanent synthetic capture. Remember, in a previous video I've told you that the planetary operating system has been upgraded, right? And the vaults are coming online, right? The throne of spiritual governance that got reclaimed is now moving towards sovereignty, right? And all the other thrones have been reclaimed, including the throne of technology, including the throne of media, right? All the inversions are unlocking. We just need more vaults open so that when the coronal mass injections start to come, there's going to be some lower coronal mass injections September, October in 2026 this year, but the big ones are coming second half of 27. And when that comes, we need enough Christic vaults open where enough flame plasma is already existing on the planet. And when that does, that's going to short circuit all the AI. And when the artificial intelligence that's built on consciousness capture, all that's going to get burnt off by the flame plasma. And so what's going to happen is that the organic consciousness is going to start being supported and restored, right? So relax. We've got this. We just all have to turn up and do the work. The architecture is being rebuilt. If you fancy coming to France and England to help open these vaults, that'd be great. Keep the dates in the diary, announcement soon. But other than that, spoons, anyone? Anyone want some spoons? Spoons is what we give with the sacred wood. Check out my website for some root initiations, which is the deepest layer of ripping out the synthetic matrix from anyone's soul and anyone's nervous system. So, that was the full architectural breakdown of the synthetic matrix. It's this ancient, sophisticated kind of technological kind of space through all those different layers, but it's losing ground, right? The archontic collective's coordination capacity is being degraded. The lower astral plane bandwidth that the draconian collective needs to continue to survive in and thrive in and run the whole team below, right, is thinning. The morphogenic field of the Christic signal is beginning to flood into the astral plane. And the PR group, the Galactic Federation, right, is starting to massively lose ground. Their signals are being dissolved. And I've got massive news for you in another week or so, once it all calms down in the field, about massive dissolutions that have happened in the spiritual plane on the PR level, right? So we're in this together. I want to thank you once again for building the morphogenetic instruction set of the golden return crystal bed, right? That's all amazing. That's helping enormously. We are rebuilding a Christic template, and we're going to start broadcasting. We're going to get these vaults open, and the thrones and the vaults are going to be sent and distributed through the Golden Return Christic network. They're on thousands of altars around the world, right? And we're going to keep building the strength of that signal. So as soon as we get the next vaults open, we're going to do another ritual, right? That's going to add those layers of the vaults through your crystal and strengthen the network. Tell your friends about it. This is how we make our comeback, okay? Consider passing this video on onto other people, right? Knowledge is not a burden. It's a key. This is a transmission, right? The energy behind the words coming through me to you is real. Pass that on to others, right? I don't care about getting more watches. You know, I don't really look at how many watches it's had. I just want to get this information out. If you resonate with it, consider sharing it. What we do here impacts not only our planet, but our galactic star brothers and sisters too. I have some exciting intel to share about the massive shift and breakthrough we've had in the synthetic matrix together because of the crystal grid are through large consciousness fields that have been a virus on society here on Earth, but also for our star brothers and sisters for eons of time. And their synthetic matrix is cracking because of what we've achieved together. More news on that to come. In the meantime, that is the full synthetic matrix stack. Oh my goodness, that was such a long video. I can even hear my voice is a bit croaky. I think it's been over 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. If you're still watching this, seriously, you're a dead legend to listen to me for that long. Hopefully you're playing it as you're driving or making dinner or something. But this is literally critical intel of the full vertical of the synthetic matrix. And at some point I will share the full vertical of the Christic matrix, of the Christic architecture. But in the meantime, absorb this. Know that we've got this. We're entering into a very, very exciting time as the old matrix begins to cough, splutter, and conk out. Consider France, Egypt. Consider the root initiation. Consider the shadow illumination or the oversoul embodiment pathway. These are our gifts and our offerings to anyone who's sincerely awakening or evolving, that really wants to go through it with support and guidance and love. And other than that, we'll catch you on the next video.